Hello, I'm Malcolm Cox, and this is your Tuesday teaching tip. Tips to help you prepare a Bible lesson, a sermon, or some other presentation. These tips are a way and not the way, but I do hope you'll try them, and then let me know how they go for you. Today we're continuing to focus on Matthew chapter 8, and this is episode number 7, Method in the Madness. What's that all about? Well, watch on. Method in the Madness. What are we talking about? Well, we're going to use another template that I like to use for lessons. I find them most useful for a midweek teaching lesson, but they can also be used for Sundays. This is a template I use that comes from a book called Teaching in Further Education by a chap called Curzon. I've adapted it for Bible lessons, but first of all, we put the date here, 21st, and our class, well, a title for our sermon, Follow Me and Find Me, I think was where we came up, what we came up with from our passage, Matthew 8:18 to 27, the two people who would follow Jesus or talk about following him, and then the ones who go into the boat and he calms the wind and the waves. I'm sure you've seen that already. Our subject, what's the subject of this class, this lesson? I think the summary is that discipleship, let's write this down, leads to discovery. Discovering who Jesus is. That's the end of the passage. What kind of man is this? Once we've got our subject clear, discipleship leads to discovery, then this is a really interesting question. What is our learning objective? In other words, what do we hope people will do? Of course, you'll have a very diverse audience. You may not know what everybody might be helpful for them to do, but nonetheless, I would say this for this passage: I hope that people identify the fears that they have, preventing them from wholehearted discipleship, and hence discovery of who Jesus is. Discovery. The two people, one who says he will follow and the other one who says, let me go and bury my father, they're not going to discover who Jesus really is. They're not wholehearted. But also the disciples in the boat. They're in the boat, but they're terrified. Are they wholehearted in their discipleship at that point? Jesus, in calming the wind and the waves, shows them who he is, and they ask the question. We will only discover who Jesus is through wholehearted discipleship. So I'm hoping, what will prevent people? Can they identify their own fears? If I can help people identify their own fears of wholehearted discipleship, then hopefully they'll make the decision to either follow him for the first time, or refresh their followership of Jesus, or help others with their fears. Duration. Now here's a good question. How long is this lesson going to be? Let's say, for the sake of argument, 30 minutes. Okay, now, the next stage. Well, I've got sections to my sermon already. I've come up with my own outline. So here's what I think we'll do here. We'll have an introduction. An introduction will give 5 minutes. The next section is going to be point 1, which is get into the boat, or get on the boat, or something like that. That's my point number 1, and that's not going to have time yet, because basically the time is going to be the sub-points here. My sub-points are going to be along the lines of: the first chap is overconfident in following, the second fella is hesitant in his following. Then our second point is going to be into the storm. This is what's going on. They're going to go into the storm in the boat. Our two sub-points are going to be something like, and let's say, see his peace, see the peace of Jesus as he's asleep in the boat, and then see his power. I like that point. And then we'll need a conclusion. So we'll give 5 minutes for the conclusion. Look at this. Let's say 5 minutes for each of these sub-points here. What does that add up to? 30 minutes. It's amazing how quickly you can use 30 minutes up on a relatively simple lesson. Now, the reason I wanted to do it this way is because of these other two columns. Sometimes we can spend so long thinking about the structure and the points that we don't think enough about the method of getting the point across and the things that we may need to aid us to get the point across. Now, I can't do the whole lesson here in all its detail because this video would be rather too long, but here are a couple of ideas. In the point about being overconfident, I have an illustration in mind, and that's about some mice who crawled into a toaster that we have and electrocuted themselves. They were overconfident about their abilities in that toaster. They didn't realize how dangerous it was. In making the point about how the mice died in the toaster, I could do a couple of things. Let's have method. How am I going to get this point across? It's to do with the toaster. I want to use this toaster. What should I do? Well, when I preached this, I had a picture of the toaster on a PowerPoint. But on reflection, perhaps it would have been even better to bring in the toaster. Actually, physically have it there on the stage and show it to everybody. I got a very strong reaction to that when I talked about it, even more so if I brought it in. Maybe that would be a good aid to get the point across about being overconfident. What about another one? What about see his peace? How do we illustrate that Jesus, even in the storm, was a man of peace? They were surprised by this. Well, an aid could be to bring in a pillow. Actually physically have a pillow on the stage, mimic laying my head on it or something like that. What I did do is I found some pictures of this passage on a website called freebibleimages.com, I think, and they allow you to use their pictures. So I use those pictures instead, but what about some other ideas? Having a pillow there. Now, if I was teaching this as a class rather than preaching it, I would also be quite likely to use some other methods. Here we've got a physical thing to bring in. Here we have PowerPoint and pictures. All of these I used PowerPoint for these particular points I was trying to get across. But there are other methods you might want to use. For example, under the see his peace point, one of my questions is going to be, what keeps us awake at night? What is it that stops us being able to sleep even in the storms of life? If we were having this as a class, I might well have us break into discussion groups, perhaps 4 or 5 people, perhaps 2 or 3, and discuss and write down together what are the things that keep us awake. Perhaps have some sharing after those short discussion groups. For something like the end of the lesson here, the conclusion, and the conclusion is to do with have the courage to be a disciple and you will discover the power of Jesus and his peace. He can give us this peace that he has. In the wrap-up, having concluded the lesson and talked about our fears, perhaps it might be an idea to have already given out a handout and ask people at the end here, why not write down on this handout your number one fear? What is your number one fear preventing you from wholehearted discipleship? Is that something you can now pray about? Is it something you could share with somebody else? In fact, I suppose handout should be here on the aids column. We need physically a handout or a piece of paper or for people to write it down on, something like that. So here you have some ideas. It's important to think about how you want to get your point across. And having thought about how you're going to get your point across, then what things do you need to help you get your point across? Something physical like a pillow or a handout for people to write things down on? What will help people internalize the truth of the passage that you're preaching, the subject that you're talking about, the subject of discipleship leading to discovery, and helping them with this learning objective to identify the fears that they have, preventing wholehearted discipleship and therefore discovery of this amazing man, Jesus Christ. I hope this kind of idea is helpful. You can adapt it for your own use and your own needs. I personally have found it to be very helpful in assisting me to discover the way to get the point across.
So, there you have it. There is method in the madness. Come back soon for our next Tuesday teaching tip. And in the meantime, please put some of these into practice and let me know how they go for you. If you have tips you'd like me to share with other people, then please email me at malcolm.cox@iccmissions.org. And that's the address if you have any other questions about lesson preparation. Until the next time, I hope you have a tremendous Tuesday and a wonderful week. God bless.